Now part of the Darkcast Network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a dark side. In today's episode, we talk about a case of love turned to hatred, marriage dissolved into revenge, and a double homicide that has been debated over for decades. By the end of this episode, I'll ask you to be the judge. We're talking about the case of Betty Broderick right now on Love and Murder. Welcome everyone. Welcome old lambs, welcome new lambs to Love and Murder, your weekly true crime podcast telling you of relationships that turn to homicide. I am your host, Kai, and in today's episode, I'm asking you to be the judge. We are talking about a case that throughout the years, people haven't decided if this person is guilty or not. Before we begin, I want to say I apologize for the background noise because I know you can hear my fan. So I apologize, but it's hot. I tried to do this recording without it on, and I almost roasted to death. I also want to remind you that this episode and all my episodes are sponsored by my lambs in Patreon, patreon.com/love and murder. If you want episodes that don't have intros, don't have commercials, get right into the meat of the episode, then join our Patreon. We also have some very interesting bonus episodes coming out this month, like the case of Angela Samota. So if you want more true crime episodes, more Kai Rants, and to be a supporter of Love and Murder, join us over in Patreon, patreon.com/love and murder. Now without further ado, grab your butts, grab your BJ's apple juice, murderandlove.com/BJ's, and let's get into this Love and Murder. Elizabeth Ann Biseglia, also known as Betty, was born in Bronxville, New York on November 7th, 1947. She was actually the third child of 6 children to parents Marita and Frank Biseglia. Frank, her father, owned a very successful plastering business, which was able to provide for his large family. The family, coming from an Irish American and Italian background, were also Catholics who ran a very strict household and expected obedience and high standards from their children. Coming from that background, Betty was raised to be a traditional wife. They didn't really raise her, according to Betty, they didn't really raise her to go to school, be a businesswoman. They raised her to be a traditional wife and support her husband. And I guess they did that with the rest of the girls and the boys they raised them to be, quote, traditional men. Quote, go to Catholic schools. Be careful with dating until you find a Catholic man. Support him while he works. Be blessed in your later years with beautiful grandchildren, end quote. This was a quote from Betty herself. She went to Maria Regina High School in Hartsdale, New York, and was able to graduate in 1965. After high school, she went to college, the College of Mount St. Vincent in the Bronx, where she was able to do an accelerated program and got a degree in teaching for early childhood education with a minor in English. Now, while she was in college, one night she did go to a dance at a different college. She and her friends went over to the University of Notre Dame, and this was in 1965. This is the same year she was going to graduate. This is where she met Dan Broderick. Now, Daniel T. Broderick III was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was the oldest child, the oldest son of a very large Irish Catholic family. So he has the Irish American background and the Catholic background. So he had a similar upbringing to Betty. When he met Betty, he was a 21-year-old medical student, and at that time, she was 17. They began talking at the dance and continued talking thereafter, and their relationship quickly progressed. 4 years later, they actually got married on April 12th, 1969. Quote, Dan never once wavered from his goal of making me his wife. He would wait, he would do and say whatever was necessary, even agreeing with me when he didn't, and doing things I wanted to do when he didn't, until he had me. Nobody ever used the terms obsessive compulsive or stalker back then, but that's what he was. A short time after they were married, Betty became pregnant with their first child, Kim, who was then born in 1970. After Kim was born, Dan completed his MD And then he decided that that's not all I want to do. I want to combine this medical degree with a law degree. So he enrolled in Harvard Law School and was accepted. Also after the wedding, according to Betty, Dan became very controlling. Quote, he took charge of the bank books and my paychecks, and I more or less had to do what he said. While all this is going on, Dan and Betty were also quickly having even more children. 4 to be exact. So they already have Kim, who was born in 1970. Then they had another daughter, Lee, who was born in 1971. They had a son named Daniel, born in 1976. And they had a son named Rhett, born in 1979. They did have another unnamed baby, but this baby died 4 days after they were born. According to Betty, she was pregnant 9 times during her marriage to Dan. She said Dan didn't allow her to use birth control. She said in addition to the children that she currently has and the one who died, she also had 2 miscarriages and 2 abortions. Then after her last child died, she got her tubes tied because she just couldn't take it anymore and she didn't want to be pregnant anymore. Also after her last child died, she said this was the first time she tried to commit suicide. Quote, I felt totally trapped with Dan and cut off from my family. I just wanted to escape from it all and die. I was 23 and I couldn't face decades more of this existence. And in addition to this instance of trying to take her life, she says there was another time when she did try to take her life as well. While all this is going on, Dan is still in school. Betty is actually the main provider for the family. He's going to school on a student loan, but you still need to be able to eat, feed all the children that you're having and everything like that. So Betty was the one working and providing for the family while Dan went to school. After Dan graduated, he was quickly hired by a law firm in San Diego, California. And so he uprooted his family and moved over to San Diego to be able to work at this law firm, helping to now provide for his family. While he started this job, Betty continued working part-time and she was selling Tupperware and doing Avon on the side while she's continuing to support Dan and raising the children. So far during the marriage, the couple constantly fought, and Betty usually threatened to leave Dan. And Dan would be like, go, whatever. He just ignored her for the most part. So Dan worked as a medical malpractice attorney for that law firm in San Diego for 3 years. And in 1978, he started his own law firm and started earning almost $1 million a year. So that's $1 million a year in 1978. And I did some math. Well, I actually went to Google. I didn't actually do the math, but I did some math, quote unquote, and figured out what $1 million back then would be today. And it would be $4.8 million. So this dude started his own business and started pulling in $4.8 million a year. So now it's time for easy living, right? Your wife supported you all through 2 schoolings, had all these kids for you, and was basically the backbone in you being able to make $4.8 million. So now it's just time for the happiness to roll in, right? Well, the marriage between Betty and Dan was quickly coming apart. Betty started suspecting Dan of having an affair, especially when in the fall of 1982, he hired a legal assistant who was a 21-year-old woman. 21-year-old Linda Kolkena had been a Delta Airlines flight attendant where she quit that job and wanted to find something new to do with her life, which is how she got this position of a legal assistant. Betty said she started suspecting an affair after she eavesdropped on a conversation where they were at a celebration for the business and he heard Dan calling Linda, quote, stunning. I mean, I don't think if I heard my husband call a woman stunning, I'd be like, oh my God, you're having an affair. Just he thinks she's beautiful. I mean, the only thing that would make me make that jump to an affair is that he got her phone number or social media or whatever people are doing these days. But just because he called her beautiful, I mean, people are beautiful. There's people more beautiful than me. I'm keenly aware of that. That's okay. Anyways, when she kept accusing him of having an affair, he would constantly say that he's not having an affair. And when Betty told him to fire Linda, he said, no, I'm not firing her. So Betty said, quote, that female has nothing on me. I'm prettier, smarter, classier. She is a dumb, uneducated tramp with no heritage or schooling or talent. He'll get over her and come back to me. Well, even with that mentality, she continued to accuse Dan of cheating on her. And by October 1983, you could see that the marriage was really, really crumbling. Well, by November 22nd, 1983, which was Dan's birthday, Betty couldn't take it anymore. What happened was she went to his business to surprise him for his birthday, only to discover that him and Linda had left for the day. Quote, I waited until like 5. She's waiting for him to come back. While she's at the office, she's looking around and she noticed there were remnants of a party, meaning they had an office party. Quote, and that's after I saw the refrigerator and my wedding crystal and all this imported wine and the stereo and his photograph on Linda's table. The funny thing was, it was a picture of him taken before we had been married. So when she saw all that, she just lost it. She went home, grabbed all of Dan's clothes, doused it in gasoline, and burned them in her backyard. She had a waiting to exhale moment. Now, I do want to clarify something for you. A lot of this information about their early life comes from Betty's words. So it actually comes from her memoir, which is called Betty Broderick, Telling on Myself. I want to make that abundantly clear because in the last week, out of all this time I've been doing this podcast, in the last week, I've had like 2 people accuse me of making stuff up in my episodes. And as all my lambs know, well, the old ones, all my old lambs know, I don't make anything up. I research, and I retell you what I researched. And if I make anything up, I let it be abundantly clear. I'll tell you like, oh, that's how I imagined it in my head or whatever. But I don't make anything up. What would be the sense in that? Then I'm not actually giving you an accurate case so you can form your opinions on. What would be the sense in me making anything up? So also the second reason I wanted to let you know where the information from the earliest parts of their life is coming from is because I'm letting you know that we're only getting one side of the story. We're only getting Betty's side of the story of how the marriage was, how it dissolved and everything like that. So I just wanted you to understand that all the early life before the trial, all of that comes from Betty's memoir. So just wanted to make that clear. So after this happened, the couple separated. In February of 1985, Dan moved out, but Betty didn't want him to. But he was like, I can't take this anymore, and he moved out. But then again, on Betty's side, if you were so tired of all the stuff he's put you through, especially since you're saying that he's cheating on you, wouldn't you want him to move out? This is just my thoughts. Anyway, he moved out and then he filed for divorce later on in 1985. According to Betty, throughout the divorce, Dan used his legal expertise to manipulate proceedings, manipulate custody arrangements, manipulate financial arrangements, and shield his assets. He moved into the family home. Betty wasn't allowed to be in the family home, but he was allowed to move back in. And he managed to gain full custody of their children. But this little tidbit, he got full custody of the children only after Betty would leave them on his doorstep one by one. So I guess she would be like, oh, you don't want me to have, spousal support? Take this child. Oh, you left me for this wench? Take this child. Like one of those. But maybe she did it out of anger, but it helped the case and he was able to get custody of the children. But according to Betty, through his manipulation, he was able to get access to the children. He restricted her access to the children. He restricted her access to financial resources and left her isolated. So basically, she just felt like she was by herself. While all this is happening, Linda moved into the family home and joined Dan.
Let's take a brief pause for a commercial break.
And if you don't like the commercial breaks, you could also join on patreon.com/love and murder. They have no commercials over there. Hey lambs, I want to share something game-changing with you because I believe in it and use it myself. Simply Safe Security System. With Simply Safe, you get 24/7 whole home protection. Every window, room, and door is covered against intruders, fires, water damage, and even medical emergencies. And the best part is, it's all monitored by professionals ready to dispatch police at a moment's notice. Now, you know I don't recommend brands that I don't use myself. Simply Safe is the real deal. Use my link, murderandlove.com/simplysafe50. That's simply with an I, safe 50, and you'll get 50% off a new system plus a free camera. Professional monitoring for under $1 a day with your first month free. No contracts, no cancellation fees, easy to install yourself or choose the optional pro install. Plus a 60-day money-back guarantee with free return shipping. No problems. murderandlove.com/simply with an I, safe 50. When you visit the site, they'll help you find a perfect security system tailored for you. And you can even buy now, pay later with Affirm. Protect what matters most with Simply Safe. Go to murderandlove.com/simply with an I, safe 50 and get started today. Also, for ease of access, link is in the show notes below. Simply Safe. Advanced security, complete peace of mind. And before we get back to the show, I want to remind you of saving money with BJ's. As you well know, I use BJ's myself, and I want to bring these savings to you. Whenever I go grocery shopping at any other store and they give me that total for bread and eggs, $100, I'm like, are you kidding me right now? When I signed up to BJ's now 3 years ago, I was just doing it just as a test to see if it was worth it. And it was, because I'm still with them 3 years later. And I want to pass these savings on to you. murderandlove.com/BJ's to get $35 off your first year's membership. Not only do you get that $35 off, but you get into a club that saves you money on groceries. And in addition to those savings, you get amazing coupons every month to help you save even more. So join me in saving money and join BJ's today. murderandlove.com/BJ's to get $35 off your first year's membership. Links are in the show notes below. Join today, save tomorrow. And now, back to the show. Now, I'm not saying that he was definitely having an affair with her. It could be possible that he just had his eye on her. Maybe later on it could have turned to an affair. But this opportunity arose that, he's leaving his wife and now he can be with Linda. Or he could have totally been having an affair. I don't know his side of the story. So this is leaving Betty feeling like she's going crazy. She's angry, she's frustrated, she's alone, and she started acting out. She started vandalizing Dan's property. She started making threats to Dan and his woman. She's claiming that Dan's making it hard for her to find a lawyer because he's a respected lawyer, might I add, making $4.8 million a year. Nobody wanted to contest him. So nobody wanted to take her on as a client, according to her, and represent her in a divorce going against Mr. Dan Broderick. Are you serious? No, maybe you should find another lawyer. She also says, like I said before, she also believed, and she's telling lawyers, that Dan is using his influence in the legal community to win sole custody of their children. He's also selling the house, even though she doesn't want him to sell the house. And if he does sell the house, he's not going to give her fair share of the sale profit. I don't know about all of that, but my question is, how are you saying that he used his manipulation to win sole custody of the children when you left them one by one on his door? So just based on that information, I don't think he used his manipulation to get the kids. I think you left the kids for whatever reason, frustration, anger, whatever. I think you left your kids, and he pointed that out to the judge, and the judge agreed that that wasn't a stable household for the kids to be in, so they need to be with their father. This is just my opinion based on the information that I was given. So 4 years after Dan filed for divorce in 1989, the divorce was finalized. After the divorce was finalized, Betty's emotional health took a nosedive. She started to act more erratic. She started leaving hundreds of messages on Dan's answering machine, cussing him out, cussing his wife out, which prompted Dan to then put a restraining order against her. He actually had multiple restraining orders against her, which she would continuously ignore. She tore up areas of the house. She even one time drove her car through his front door, even though at the time that she did that, her children were inside the house. Dan, on the other side, tried to control Betty or maintain control over Betty by every time she did something, like, for instance, if she didn't listen to the restraining order and she showed up, he wouldn't give her support payment. So, okay, you weren't supposed to come within 500 feet of the house, yet here you are. So this month, I'm not giving you your $2,000 check. Stuff like that. So in addition to docking her payments, he would also send her letters, like legal letters saying cease and desist and whatever other legal jargon you can say to leave me the frick alone and stop doing that. All this in legal jargon. And even one time he had her temporarily admitted to a mental health institution. Betty described how she felt in going to court with Dan in these words. Quote, "It's as if you're putting a housewife in the ring with Muhammad Ali." That's how she felt. I think with everything going on, Betty was she's really coming apart mentally. She feels like she's being manipulated. She feels like she was replaced. She feels like she has no one in her corner. And I also have I have an idea of why this all is happening, but I'll save that to the end and I'll see if y'all agree with me. On April 22nd, 1989, Dan and Linda got married. Linda was so worried about Betty coming to her wedding and doing something crazy that she was pushing Dan to wear a bulletproof vest to their wedding because she thought, because clearly she thought Betty would come and show up and shoot Dan or whatever. So she was trying to get him to wear bulletproof vests, but he didn't, and Betty didn't show up at all. After the wedding, though, Betty would tell everybody that Linda had started mailing her facial cream and slimming ads, telling her she's old and she's fat, here's, stuff like that. She also said that Linda would start taunting her and stuff like that. But my thing is, why start that after the wedding? Wouldn't you do that before the wedding? But, maybe it could happen. It could happen. I'm not saying it didn't. Then, on November 5th, 1989, at around 5:30 a.m., Betty showed up at Dan's house. She used the key that she had taken from Kim to enter the house and walked around the house, probably making herself even more angry. This should be mine and this should be mine. I'm the one who put him through college. And when she got to Dan and Linda's bedroom, she saw them sleeping together. That's when she fired 5 shots with a .38 caliber revolver that she had just bought a month after Dan married Linda. Linda was hit twice in the neck and chest, killing her instantly, and Dan was injured when he was shot and the bullet fractured a rib, penetrated his right lung. 1 bullet hit the wall and 1 bullet hit a nightstand. Dan was shot in this way because at this time he was reaching for the phone, and when Betty saw that, she ripped the phones out of the wall to stop anybody from calling for help. When this incident occurred, Betty was 2 days away from turning 42, Dan was 17 days away from turning 45, and Linda was 28 years old. After this incident, she ran from the house. So police officers arrived at the scene to find 2 people fatally shot. They found Linda on the edge of the bed and Dan on the floor, both of them dead. Because police knew of the divorce, they knew of the multiple restraining orders and everything that was going on with this family, the first person they thought of who could do this was Betty. Now Betty, after she ran from the house, she called her daughter Lee. Lee and her boyfriend answered the phone and spoke to Betty, calmed her down, everything like that, and Betty later surrendered to police. When she was brought into an interrogation room, she did admit that she pulled the trigger, but she said she didn't mean to kill them. I didn't go over there to kill them. I just wanted to talk to Dan, ask him what was wrong, why did you leave me, blah, 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 and then I was going to commit suicide in front of him. I was not planning on going over there and committing murder. So police arrested her and charged her with 2 counts of murder. So, if convicted of these 2 counts of murder, she could actually face life in prison without the possibility of parole. She pled not guilty and was held without bail in the Las Colinas jail. Now, when this case went to trial, it actually happened in 2 separate trials, and we're going to get into that. Criminal defense attorney Jack Ely represented Betty, and Carrie Wells was the prosecutor for the state of California. Betty's defense was that she was a battered wife. She said over the years, Dan had basically driven her crazy through physical, mental abuse, and psychological abuse. She said he would manipulate everything, he would gaslight her, whatever, and make her question her perception of something happened, her memory, and just her sanity on a whole. Quote, no one has the right to take the life of another human being. However, Dan's consistent lies, minimizations, and calling Betty crazy fueled a lot of the animus in their relationship. Dan's constant denials of an affair escalated Betty's pre-existent narcissistic personality disorder and a need for order. They pointed out that although Betty would do things to Dan, like throw things at him, talk bad about him to other people, lock him out of the house, and I guess ultimately kill him, this was because of her loss of control and she just couldn't take it anymore. Which, to me, that's a weak defense. Because she didn't have control, she did all these things to this man, and he was supposed to just take it? Like, that's a weak defense. He did what any rational human being would do, which is to leave. According to her defense, she did not go to that house with the premeditated idea to murder anyone. So basically, Your Honor, to be charged with first-degree murder, you have to have that idea of premeditated killing, but she did not have that idea. She only wanted to go to the house to confront him and then kill herself. Then they presented evidence showing that Betty was suicidal. There was a letter that she sent to her divorce lawyer, and that was in her own handwriting, that was a week before the murders, that said, quote, I can't stand this anymore. Constant threats of court, jail, contempt, fines, etc., which is very scary to me, and no matter what the evidence, I always lose. And then another part of the letter says, quote, them always insinuating I'm crazy. So this is just showing that, she's slowly losing it. Well, the prosecution portrayed her as a premeditated murderer. They pointed out her calculated actions leading up to the crime. They even had her boyfriend take the stand. Yes, throughout all of this, she had a boyfriend. Me, personally, I thought she was alone because she said she was isolated, she was alone, everything like that. She had a boyfriend, Bradley T. Wright. Bradley said they began dating in 1985. And 1985 is when Dan filed for divorce. So you had a boyfriend this whole time. Well, he took the stand and he was actually a prosecution witness, and note that he's still with Betty even after she committed murder. He still stayed there and supported her even though he's testifying against her. Anyways, he took the stand and he did say that she was suicidal, and he described flash marks and scarring that Betty had all over her left arm, and they even had Betty hold out her arm for the jurors to see that she had these slash marks. Even though he is a prosecution witness, the prosecution still came back and said that all of this talk of suicide and the suicide attempts were more for show and not actual evidence of suicide attempts. And interestingly enough, it was actually Bradley who found the bodies of Dan and Linda. He told the court that he had spent the night with Betty, and when he woke up, he saw she was gone and that the phone was ringing. When he picked up the phone, one of Betty's friends was on the phone and she said, "Look, Bradley, you have to go to Dan's house right now and make sure that everything over there is okay." So he jumped in his car, drove over to the house, and when he got to the house, he's the one who found the bodies, the bloody murder scene and everything like that. And he's the one who called the cops. He also testified that although she was suicidal, and although he was still in a relationship with her after she murdered her ex-husband and she's going through a murder trial and he's speaking for the prosecution. Anyways, even after all of that, he did say that she did often speak of her hatred of Dan, and she did often talk about her desire to kill him and Linda. So I do want to point out that in doing the research, in some publications it said he spoke of her being suicidal, and in others he spoke of her desire to kill them. They never put the two in the same article. So it didn't say that he spoke of her being suicidal and he spoke of her hatred for them. It was in different publications that I read each one. So I just put it together and I said, he said she was suicidal and he spoke of his desire to kill them. So I did want to point that out. Dr. Ruth Roth, who was the psychologist who tried to mediate the resolution between Daniel and Betty, who was the psychologist mediator over the custody battle with Daniel and Betty, testified at the trial. She said that Betty didn't suffer from mental disorders. Instead, she said, quote, "I think she was angry." She said Betty told her that she threatened her ex-husband, quote, "all the time." In March of 1987, she interviewed both Betty and Dan while trying to get them to agree on a custody arrangement for their children so that they wouldn't have to go to court. She also said that although Betty was the one who kept dropping the kids off at Dan's house, she would come back and said that she wanted custody of the children. Then, at other times, she would randomly come out and say that if Dan would give her custody of the children, she would refuse it. So it was like, which one do you want? She also testified that by late 1989, Dan was actually considering returning custody of the two younger boys to Betty. But when she had her meetings with Dr. Ross alone, Betty refused to discuss custody matters. She would just go off on a tangent and, as Dr. Roth said, quote, started off on her own agenda. Dr. Roth also testified to the court that on March 3rd, 1987, Betty said, quote, "I'm not going to be a single parent of 4 kids. He'll die first." In that same session, she also said, quote, "The less I see them or hear from them, the better. No bother, no kids." Dr. Roth told the court that when she heard these comments coming from Betty, she decided to go against the client-doctor privacy privilege, and she ended up telling Dan what Betty had said. Now, she didn't break the law because if there is a threat made against a person, the law does allow you to breach that patient-client confidentiality rule. She also said that on March 12, 1987, Betty repeated her comments again, saying, quote, "No way I'm going to be a single mother with 4 kids. He'll die first. I'm not letting go that easy. The little bitch was mine. He'll stay mine." This is what she said. So she said this twice. So Dr. Roth decided to ask her point blank if this was a threat. And she responded with, quote, "I threatened a bitch all the time." Then Sylvia Cavins took the stand. She was Daniel's housekeeper from December 1987 to November 1989. She's testified that she heard Betty threaten him 3 different times. Well, I'm going to say this. She heard her threaten him all the time, but 3 times that she considered real. She said the spring that Dan and Linda were married, Betty threatened to put, quote, 4 bullets in Dan's head, 1 for each of the kids. So when she said that, the defense said, "Oh, got you there. Why, when the police asked you about the threat, why did you say that Betty planned to shoot him 3 times, not 4? And the housekeeper said, quote, "I must have meant 4, which again, another weak argument. Got you there. When the police questioned you, you said that she said she was going to shoot him 3 times. Now on the stand, you're saying 4. What does it matter? The point is, She said she was going to shoot him. Doesn't matter if it was 1, 3, 5, 18. Like, are you serious? That was your defense? She also said shortly after she started working for Dan, that's when she started hearing Betty threatening him. One of those threats that happened shortly after she started working was when Betty said, quote, she would kill Dan. This was like right after she started working. So then she tried to defuse the situation, really not really, because she doesn't know this woman, so she's not really taking it seriously. So she said, quote, oh great, he'd be dead and you'd either be dead or in prison and the children would be orphans. And in response to that, Betty said that would not be a problem because a jury, when it found out what Dan did to me, would let me off. That's what she told the housekeeper. And so the housekeeper responded with, quote, I wouldn't count on that. Then the prosecution had forensic psychiatrists and criminologists take the stand. This was Dr. Park Diet, and he actually used the analysis of Dr. Melvin Goldsban, who actually worked on the case for the prosecution, and that he used that analysis and brought it to the court. Diet said that Betty had a histrionic and narcissistic personality, and he read from Dr. Goldsban's notes that said Betty did have this kind of personality and that she was, quote, severely narcissistic and histrionic. Basically, Your Honor, they said, she has an inflated sense of self-importance and a need to be the center of attention. So after all that was brought before the court, brought before the jury and everything like that, the trial ended in a hung jury, with 2 jurors wanted to go for manslaughter because they said there was a lack of intent there for a first-degree murder charge. So they couldn't come to a unanimous agreement and it ended in a hung jury. Well, the trial started again later that year with the same defense attorney, same prosecutor, literally the same trial. Everything went how it had before. And on December 11th, 1991, the jury came back with a guilty verdict of 2 counts of second-degree murder. Betty was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of 15 years to life, plus 2 years for illegal use of a firearm. This was the maximum sentence under the law at that time. Keep in mind that even though she was just now found guilty, she had still been in jail since 1989, since the murder. So she started serving her sentence at the California Institute for Women in Chino, California. Then in January of 2010, she requested parole, alleging exclusion of crucial evidence by the presiding judge. Her defense argued that this could have influenced the jury's decision, so please grant us parole. The judge denied this parole because they said that she did not show remorse or even acknowledge her wrongdoing. She again tried to get parole in November 2011, January 2017, and each time she was denied. She actually won't be eligible for parole again until January of 2032. By that time, she'll be 84. Currently, she is in prison. She's still in the same prison, and she's currently working in various aspects of the prison, like scheduling for the mental health unit. She's doing janitorial work, and she reportedly enjoys doing everything that she's doing in prison. She's actually described as a model citizen. Now, one day, somebody found letters from Betty to Bradley. These letters dated from 2003 to 2006, and it showed that even after she was sentenced, Bradley was still sending her money. Bradley, after these letters were found, said that he wished these letters were never discovered, which were in his storage locker. What happened was he quit paying rent to the storage facility, and then the stuff in there were auctioned off, which, if you know you're not able to make the rent, take your stuff out. I don't know. I'm not going to judge. I don't know what was going on in his life. Maybe he couldn't afford to get a truck. Maybe he didn't have friends with a truck. He couldn't get his stuff out of the locker. Who am I to judge? He said, quote, for me personally, it's just like reopening a sore wound that I've tried after all this time to sort of fade away. I don't know why the American public is always so excited about these kinds of things. Well, Bradley, I know on my part, I'm not excited about it. What I take from true crime is understanding the mentality. For me, it's a psychological thing. Understanding the mentality of people who do these things. Why are you doing these things? Which I haven't come to an understanding of it. And I guess I never will, because I'm not somebody who would do these things. So it's more of trying to psychologically understand people, as well as hearing things that people would do that I wouldn't have even thought could have been like, it just makes me more aware. And I bring these stories out to make other people more aware of what could possibly happen in the world. And maybe if somebody was thinking about doing the same thing, helping them make a different decision. That's what my true crime is about. So that's to answer what you're saying, Bradley, if you ever hear this. So in the letters, Betty talked about her love for Bradley and everything like that. Stuff she should have thought about before she was murdering her husband, because she had been with Bradley when he divorced her, when he filed a petition to divorce, 1985. So maybe before you ruined the kid's life, you should have thought about your love for Bradley, not while you're in prison and after everything is done. In one letter from April 2006, she said, quote, "If I had a penny for every time I think of you, I'd be a millionaire many times over." Again, that should have happened before you took drastic action. In another one, she said, quote, "I was thinking of what I'm looking for in a man, since you're not available. Well, the list was a description of you. You're exactly the guy, damn it." Again, when you had him, you wasn't thinking like that. If he's such the perfect man, you shouldn't have been obsessing over another man, which I know the other man was your ex-husband, but still, if your ex-husband was so terrible and horrible towards you and you found the perfect man, shouldn't you have just moved on? And I guess from that comment, Bradley had already moved on. And so in another letter, she's trying to get him to leave who he's with and sneak away with her and visit her in prison. Like, woman, you're in prison. What can he do? You're literally in prison for the rest of his life. You want him to leave the woman that's with him, who actually physically acts like he is the perfect man, and leave this person to come to prison to visit you? Quote, "If you want to live in La Playa with me like you say you do, going back to Lisa is not how it's going to happen. I can't believe you don't come here. It's been years. Now that she's back to work, maybe you can sneak away?" I think she may have these mental health disorders that those doctors said, because even though she had a man, when Dan had a woman, she just couldn't take that. Now that Dan's out of the way, and I use that term not crassly, but now that he's gone, now she's focused on Bradley, even though she already had Bradley, but now Bradley has another woman, so now it's like, oh, put your focus back on me. What are you doing? Leave her. And I wonder if she was out, if she would have still taken those same drastic measures that she did with Dan. In another letter, she said, quote, "Sorry to hear your life is a mess. I don't want to come back to a mess." Come back. Did you go to counseling? Whatever patterns you will have will continue for better or worse. You know the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result? I should know. I'm really glad she said that, because I was about to say, are you serious right now? Because you were in counseling. You didn't take the counselor's advice, and you were the definition of insanity. But I guess she knew that, and she just, I don't know. In other letters, she's continuously begging Bradley for money and for attention and everything like that. And I actually have all of the letters, the pictures of the letters in my Patreon, as well as the receipts for the money. So you can go to patreon.com/loveandmurder. That's part of the extras that I do add to every case. If they're pictures, if they're videos, which this case has a video of her daughter testifying in court. So videos, pictures, court documents, all of that is also in the Patreon. This happens for any episode, and that's part of the extra bonuses my exclusive lambs get. Patreon.com/loveandmurder. Currently, Bradley is married and has completely moved on with his life. And, he's not looking back on Betty. Quote, "So much time has elapsed right now, so this revelation that there were some letters from Betty to me that surfaced out of nowhere, I mean, so what?" This is what he said. Now, Betty and Dan's kids, of course, are adults now. Kim and her brothers Dan and Rhett are all married with children. They all have girls. Well, as far as the last recording of what's going on with them, they all had girls. And they apparently visit her in prison. The reason why I know that is because there was a picture of her with her kids and her grandkids in prison. When Betty was arrested, Kim was 19, Lee was 18, Daniel was 13, and Rhett was 10. Rhett actually did an interview with Oprah, and Betty had done an interview with Oprah also from prison earlier. So Oprah did an interview with Betty first, and then she did an interview with Rhett. And Rhett said on the interview with Oprah that he wasn't surprised by his mom's actions at all. Quote, "I just remember thinking, wow, I wasn't really surprised. On multiple occasions, my brother and I went to my dad and said to him that we wanted to live with my mom and that not having her kids was driving her crazy and that she could do something extremely irrational if she didn't have us." After his mom was arrested, Rhett and Daniel moved in with Kathy Broderick, which is their Uncle Larry Broderick's ex-wife out in Colorado. Rhett then explained that the years following were really chaotic. He was going between relatives and going between boot camp for troubled teens. Quote, "I constantly felt like I was under the microscope. Like everything I did, they were trying to blame on my parents' situation." And I guess, that could have made him even more angry. Like, I'm doing this because of me, not because of I understand. And I'm not trying to speak for him. I'm just speculating here. That could have just made him even more angry and made him lash out more, that you're not seeing him for him. You're seeing him for what happened to his parents. Later on, Lee had also reported that her father had written out of his will because she was going through a troubled time. She was having problems with school, problems with drugs, and he had written her out of his will. In his will, he had said that the Broderick estate would be divided equally among his 3 other kids. And Lee wasn't part of that. I really hope that maybe the siblings gave her something. Now, her children are divided on whether or not she should be released. Lee and Rhett thinks that she should be let out, while Dan and Kim thinks that she should be left in. Again, their thought process might have changed by now, but as of the last reporting, this is what they thought. Lee actually had gone to one of her parole hearings and said that she had a room prepared for her mother. Quote, "Should she ever be able to live her later life outside of the prison walls?" During the interview with Oprah, Rhett said, quote, "Keeping her in prison isn't really helping her. She's not a danger to society. The only 2 people she was a danger to are dead." Dan said that he felt that his mother should remain in prison. Quote, "In my heart, I know my mother is a good person, but along the way she got lost. Releasing a lost person into society could be a dangerous mistake." And Kim had actually testified against her mother's release. And I do have that video in the Patreon, patreon.com/loveandmurder. Now, Betty's actions and trials has been the subject of several books, several documentaries, several TV movies, and people still talk about this case to this day, hence this episode. There's actually a Netflix movie out there called Dirty John, the Betty Broderick story. I haven't watched it though, but I wanted to tell you that there is a movie out there. Some things that I brought to you in this whole episode was not in the movie. This is what I read, because I read about the movie and it said that XYZ wasn't in the movie. So, it's just a loose movie, and you know how they dramatize everything. So it might not even be completely believable. But anyway, there's that movie, Dirty John, the Betty Broderick story. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the case of Betty Broderick? Like in the middle of the episode, I was telling you that I would bring you my thoughts. And what I think is that with all these pregnancies and losing babies, abortions, everything, with all these pregnancies, period, I really believe that she had a depressive episode that was not being treated. Because remember, once you get pregnant, your body starts getting flooded with hormones. When that pregnancy is over, the hormones are flooding out of you, which then can change the chemistry of your brain. And with everything that was going on at that time, back to back pregnancies, And, you know, she's feeling like she's the only one making money, dealing with all these children. Dan not really looking at the situation and just focusing on his studies and everything. It could be that she was going through postpartum depression that wasn't treated, that then turned into something else. And especially the baby dying, having 2 abortions, miscarriages, that can wreak havoc on a person. And I really think this is what happened. I really think she was having some mental issues dealing with all those births that was not being diagnosed, that was not being taken seriously, and that was not being looked at. That's what I think. Am I giving her an excuse for murder? No, I'm not. But I'm thinking that's what was going on. So what do you think? Do you think she's a victim of circumstance, or do you think she's a cold-blooded killer who is actually unremorseful for her actions, as the parole board said, as the psychologist said? What do you think? So I'm going to go ahead and put out a poll. That question is going to be too long for the Spotify poll because they only give me a certain number of characters. So I'm going to figure out how to shorten that question, but that's the gist of it. Do you think she's a victim of circumstance, or do you think she's a cold-blooded killer? Do you think she premeditated this murder, or do you think she actually went in there to commit suicide, but then she just saw what was going on and just got angry and then committed murder? So I want to hear from you. I'm going to have that poll question out. Don't forget, I also have the WhatsApp if you want to answer the polls in the WhatsApp, murderandlove.com/WhatsApp. You can also answer it by joining Patreon. You can answer it in the Facebook group, or you can answer it on Spotify. These are all the places that you can answer this poll question. Or you could just leave me a comment below in whatever platform you're on. And that is all I have for you today. I want to remind you that a free and easy way to help out Love and Murder is by simply sharing this episode. So go ahead and share this episode with your mom and your friend, and share it to Reddit, because we're sharing it with everyone we know and everyone we don't. And as I leave you at the end of every full episode, I want to remind you that it is, say it with me now, all love and no murder, y'all. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye. Oh, don't forget to stay tuned for my commercial guest.
I'm Dawn.
And I'm Cole.
And Scottish Murders is a true crime podcast dedicated to people from or living in Scotland.
Just like anywhere else in the world, these murders can be truly horrific and shocking, and we want to shine more light upon them.
Join us every 2 weeks on Scottish Murders, where we'll bring you cases both solved and unsolved, giving you an insight into the other side of bonnie Scotland.
Find us wherever you stream your podcasts, as well as on social media.
Join us there. Bye!